We begin today's show in Texas, where millions were plunged into freezing cold and darkness as a major winter storm overwhelmed the state's underprepared power grid. At least 38 people have died. Hundreds of thousands remain without power as Texas faces record low temperatures. More than 12 million Texans face water disruptions and have been ordered to boil tap water to ensure its safety, even though many lack the electricity to do so. Some parts of Texas have no running water at all. Texas is also running out of food as the storm has disrupted key supply chains. This is a resident of Denton, Texas.
We had a fireplace and I burnt up all the wood we had. This is sad. This is a sad state of affairs. I wish it were better, but somebody's got to do some planning after all this is over and make sure there's an alternative source of energy.
Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott took to Fox News Tuesday to blame renewable energy for Texas's blackouts, saying the Green New Deal would be deadly for the U.S.
This shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America. Texas is blessed with multiple sources of energy, such as natural gas and oil and nuclear.
Abbott's comments contradicted Texas's own energy department, which said the outages were due to, quote, frozen instruments at natural gas, coal, and even nuclear facilities. Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "The infrastructure failures in Texas are quite literally what happens when you don't pursue a Green New Deal," unquote. There are three energy grids in the United States: in the West, in the East, and in Texas, which set up its own independent power grid, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, in the 1930s to avoid federal regulation. Now hit by cold weather, it collapsed. On Wednesday, ABC News asked ERCOT CEO Bill Magnus if Texas should be integrated into the national grid. This was his response.
Well, again, we've got to focus on getting this problem solved and getting the power back on. I imagine there will certainly be, investigation of this event to determine what the right approach to going forward is. But today, I'm not really focused on going forward. I'm sure those discussions will come, but right now we got to get the power back on for people.
Meanwhile, in a blog post Wednesday by House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, titled "What's Up in Texas?", former Governor Rick Perry, who was Energy Secretary under President Trump, said Texans would prefer rolling blackouts to government regulations. Perry said, quote, "Those watching on the left may see the situation in Texas as an opportunity to expand their top-down radical proposals. Two phrases come to mind: don't mess with Texas and don't let a crisis go to waste. Texans would be without electricity for longer than 3 days to keep the federal government out of their business," he said. Well, for more, we go to Houston, Texas, where we're joined by one of those Texans who went without electricity. Robert Bullard is a distinguished professor at Texas Southern University, known as the father of environmental justice. He's the author of many books, including The Wrong Complexion for Protection and Confronting Environmental Racism, Voices from the Grassroots. He's also the co-chair of the National Black Environmental Justice Network. Dr. Bullard, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you describe your own experience and the situation of people in Texas right now, this devastating state collapse, which seems traceable back to just they didn't want to be federally regulated, and how it's disparately affected Texans?
Well, first of all, Amy, good morning. I'm really glad that my power is back on and can have this interview. I was out power for 2 days. The lights came back on yesterday. The temperature had dropped outside. I think it was 11 degrees. Inside my house was had gotten low 40s, 41, something like that. Very cold. We Texans are not used to that. And I've gotten calls from some folks in Houston. Their temps in their homes went down in the 30s. To hear elected officials talking about we are proud to be off the grid in terms of the U.S. and Texans pride themselves as being the Lone Star State. But when it comes to this this cold spell and this failure, we are alone. We are the alone star state. The impact of this storm is more than just power outages and inconveniences for those communities that historically have been impacted by energy insecurity, energy poverty, having to pay a larger portion of their household income for energy. And this kind of disruption with this cold spell and with people having to raise the thermostat to keep warm will mean after this power outage has been restored, people are going to have high bills, utility bills, and some won't be able to pay, and some will get shutoffs. That's the inequity that's piled on top of the inequity, and we see this happening all across the city as well as the state. And we're also dealing with the era of COVID. No power, no lights, no water. There's no way for you to boil water if you can't, if you don't have electricity, and there's no way to wash your hands and deal with COVID if you don't have water. So it's a pandemic. It's a catastrophe piled and converging, which is technically a mess.
And Dr. Bullard, could you respond to what the Texas governor has said, Greg Abbott, blaming renewable energy sources for the blackouts?
Well, you know, he made the statement and then walked it back. And then talking about we have a diverse energy portfolio. And as a matter of fact, the facts don't bear out what he said. And the renewables outperform the other natural gas and coal and nuclear. We have to really look at science, and a lot of the finger pointing and blame game is not really based on science. Well, it is partially. It's called political science. And I think people who are suffering right now and hurting with no power, no money, no water, no form of transportation to get to the grocery store to get water, where there is no water, bottled water in the stores or food. They want to see action and answers, and there will even officials are calling for an investigation. But a real investigation would actually start pointing back to individuals that are in charge. And so I think the idea of Texas not being part of the union has really been a textbook example of how not to do it. We are a failed state right now, in every sense of the word.
You know, talking about the issue of environmental justice, we were in Houston and interviewed you, Dr. Bullard, after one of the major hurricanes, and we were looking at the frontline communities who are so hard hit by these hurricanes, disparately affected, much worse than other communities. Then, as you said, you have COVID. You have some heating centers if people are lucky enough to get into one, because the electricity is out in so many places, but I don't know if it's lucky because they're packed in like sardines when we're dealing with the pandemic. And then you have this issue of renewable energy. It looks like Governor Abbott went on Fox, on Hannity, to say this is about the Green New Deal, which hasn't even been passed yet. But then locally, knowing no one would buy it in the Petro Metro, where you live in Houston, or anywhere else in Texas, he walked it back. But that got out there fire into the right-wing blogosphere and Twitter sphere, and that's what they are blaming when we're talking about something like 10% wind turbines when they were supposed to be updated and they weren't. But so much more, the vast majority of the energy sources are not renewable. Can you talk about why you see this as an environmental justice issue? And you're so famous for saying, depends on who's at the table in deciding how we move forward. You have a complete failed state right now. How do the right people get at the table?
Well, it's important that we take a comprehensive view of what is happening here on the ground. The very communities that were hit especially hard during Harvey and the flooding, and as you map that, you can see it's the same communities overlaid that were hit the hardest, Black and brown communities, by COVID. If you overlay the power outages and the rolling blackouts, et cetera, and you start to look at the releases from these refineries and plants because of unstable power, and the releases, over 300,000 pounds of pollution was released during this, I guess 3 days or so. That created lots of problems in terms of potential health impacts, releasing of benzene, which is a known carcinogen. So we're talking about environmental, we're talking about health, we're talking about energy, we're talking about issues related to access to food and healthcare. All those things are rolled up in one. And when we talk about a solution, that means that we need to have the right people at the table when decisions are being made as to how we come out of this catastrophe with a solid plan, and not assume that, well, we can just paste it over and say we can go on as business as usual and not expect to have something like this to reoccur. Lessons unlearned. We had a major power outage, I think it was 2011 or so, and there were no lessons learned from that. There was no lessons that we could have taken forward and strengthen our system, our grid, and to talk about building something that is solid, sustainable, and resilient for everybody. Now, there are some people that have not missed a beat. If you have a generator that's pumping in your backyard, or if you have a credit card and can drive to a hotel and wait it out, your hurt and pain may be less than those who feel the hurt and pain first, worst, and longest. So we have to come through this with more people in those rooms in Austin talking about solutions, and not the same people who created the problem. We can't expect them to solve the problem.
Well, Bob,
that's not real.